I would imagine that unless you've been living under the proverbial rock, you're familiar with what we now call the original trolley problem, even though it isn't the original trolley problem. And we could talk about that elsewhere. So I think everybody has seen this template called bystander at the switch, where there is a trolley, it's going down a track, and it's going to run over 5 people, unfortunately, tied to the tracks, unless the bystander at the switch flips the switch and chooses to sacrifice one other person who is tied to a different alternative trolley line, saving the 5, but at the expense of the 1. And it's often used in ethics classes or, in all sorts of other frameworks. It even made its way into a television show to try to make a case about our moral reasoning. And I don't remember exactly what my initial motivation for this was, but I think I had seen another interesting version of the trolley problem, and I got it in my head about 2 weeks ago. I should see what people might say if it was me on the track. And I'll put it out there in my social media so you can see the modification that I created of it. I put my face in the place of the guy who's laying there on the track screaming. I probably should have picked a photograph where I had my mouth open like him, and I captioned it, "Are you going to squish the Sadler man?" And then I posted it in my social media and YouTube channel with the following prompt. There's a ton of trolley problem memes out there. I got to thinking about them and made a new one where it gets a bit more personal. Would you flip the switch and have the trolley run me over to save the 5? And then I put in parentheses. I'll tell you, I'd flip that switch myself, but that's me. So I was hoping to solicit a range of responses, and notice that I'm looking for answers, but not just yes, no. I'm hoping that I'll get some more well-developed answers, because this is really all about our moral reasoning. And so I did, in fact, get a number of interesting answers. So a number of people were asking for or adding information outside of the problem's parameters as we had it set up. So one person said, can the other 5 produce YouTube philosophy content? And I said, you got the information the meme conveys, and that's it. Another person turned it into music. Would it make a difference if it were 5 punks and 1 classic heavy metal fan? Of course, I'm the heavy metal fan in this case, and there's this legendary rivalry between punks and metalheads that I think more or less died out in the 80s. And I said, what you've got are just 5 people, so it kind of doesn't matter. And then 2 other interesting responses. Oh, geez, is it a random set with some dark chance where my mother is part of the bundle? I am so sorry. And I said, well, there's nothing in the meme to suggest that. And then they said, no, I meant in my imagination. So people are reading things in here that aren't actually in the template. And then finally, if we're going to bring specific people into this, then shouldn't we know who the 5 are too? And I said, no. The meme is what it is. So I think there's this tendency on people's part to think, oh, if I could only add some information to this, then it would be more decidable. But that's kind of the point of the trolley problem. Another person tried to change the problem's parameters, and you just can't do that, and it remained the same problem. You could say, well, we'll just make a 3rd track or something like that. No, you get the 2 tracks, you get the runaway trolley. So somebody wrote, I refuse to do any of those 2 things. I would ask for help from other people so we can quickly save all of them. I think it's a boring answer, but that's what I would do. And yeah, it is a boring answer because it doesn't actually stick with the problem, and it sort of transposes it into a hypothetical real life where you could ask other people for help. But I mean, the very way this is set up is you don't get to ask other people for help. You have to make a decision. So I think that's kind of an evasion of responsibility and decision making there. Then we move on to some people who said, I would let 5 people die for saving you, and they didn't provide any real reasoning there. So one person said would never squish the Sadler man, and I'd kind of want to know why not. The Sadler man himself said I would flip the switch and let it crush me instead of the 5. So where's this coming from? Another said tough for the group, Sadler the GOAT, so greatest of all time, presumably because of my video content, or maybe they're interested in other stuff that I do as well. And, again, no real reasoning provided other than somehow I'm special. Then we get to cases where there is reasoning, but I don't think it's very good reasoning, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. So a lot of them centered on the fact that I've done philosophy lectures, and specifically the half-hour Hegel series, which is actually just one small part of my video production. It's about, I would say, maybe 1/9 of my total video production. So somebody wrote, there's very little chance any one of them created a 300 plus episode series explaining Hegel. So I think my answer is clear, namely that they wouldn't flip the switch and they'd let the 5 die in my place. And notice, it's not about my potential to create. It's about the fact that I have created. Somebody else wrote, I will definitely save you. I'm so grateful for the Hegel video series. And then somebody else responded, maybe they also have lectures on Hegel, though. Maybe Jordan Peterson is among them. Tough choice. And I think a lot of people know how I feel about Peterson. If he were on the tracks, I probably would let it run over him in order to save somebody else, no problem. So some people are fans of him. I'm sort of at the opposite end. And then finally, somebody else wrote, who's going to give everybody philosophy lectures if we get rid of Sadler? That's hardly a good idea. Who are the others? And, if you think about it, are there other people producing lectures on philosophy? Yeah, there's thousands of them. They're not necessarily all good, but I'm willing to say that quite a few of them out there are good when they stick to what they actually know about. So these aren't really great ways of handling the problem. And then we've got some others that also have to do with videos, and I think that this is a more sensible way of approaching things. So if we're going to make production of videos the relevant criteria, then notice what these other people are saying. I would first make a quick phone call to confirm whether the full extent of your philosophical knowledge has been shared with the world. Well, okay, so that's probably going to get a negative answer, and then the person, I suppose, would let the 5 get run over. Somebody else, who I think is probably not all that well informed, or maybe they're thinking just projecting backwards into time, would depend on whether you'd finished all of half-hour Hegel or not. And that's a weird thing, I mean, why are half-hour Hegel lectures so important as to justify running over innocent people who didn't choose to be on those tracks? I don't think that they are. And then, now here's a really interesting one. I mean, who needs you when we've got all those excellent YouTube videos? It'd be like you never even died to some. And that's one that I think is worth exploring elsewhere at greater length, because we could, in fact, create a AI, whatever you want to say, AI-driven avatar who talks about philosophy. Probably not all that coherently at this point in time, but maybe it'll get better over time. So perhaps I could be replaced now that I've actually produced. We move on. And there's other criteria that people have picked for sacrificing the other 5. One of them said, can't do it, Sadler man, mainly because this seems to me now turned into a known good dude versus 5 strangers problem. And I don't think that you sacrifice 5 strangers just because you know somebody to be a good dude or a good person or whatever. That doesn't strike me as very good reasoning. And then this one, nope, he's a known friend to cats. The others have not been properly vetted. Again, I don't think that that's a satisfactory criteria for sacrificing 5 people and saving 1. Finally, we get to what I actually consider and said right at the beginning is what I think the right response is. So somebody wrote, save the people, RIP to my boy. And so, you know, there's no like, oh, screw that Sadler guy or anything like that. It's more, well, we'd rather not kill anybody, but if we got to sacrifice one person, even if he is known to us, even if he's produced Hegel videos, even if he likes cats, whatever we want to include in there, the right thing to do is to save those people. And somebody else wrote, sorry, Greg, squishy, squishy, which is a right response in my view as well. There were 2 other interesting responses that I wanted to highlight, and these I think we could think a little bit more about. So one person said, no, I get less value out of 5 strangers than I do you. Okay, so he would sacrifice the 5 to save me, but then he says, though it would be different if I had to look them all in the eye. So relationship kind of plays a role here, even if it's not a full relationship, even if they're strangers. And then he adds as well, it would also be interesting because I would imagine you'd be upset with me as well, damaging our, and he acknowledges here, parasocial relationship. We don't actually have a relationship. And, you know, it's impossible for me to have more than parasocial relationships with most of the people who watch my videos, read my stuff, listen to my podcast, just in because there's so many, right? The same way as it would be for anybody who is producing content that a lot of people watch. But the idea that I might disapprove, right, or be upset is an interesting criteria. And then finally, here's the last one. I like the trolley problem because I know from the comfort of my home thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, I'd probably save the 5 people, but in person, I'd be puking on myself in anxiety, waiting for someone to tell me what to do. I think that's a very human response and very honest admission. And he finishes by saying, so if you tell me to do it, I'd like to think I would. So if I'm saying, pull the switch, run me over, save these 5 people, this guy would do it, but he would have a very difficult time without that sort of guidance. So I think that's some really interesting responses to finish this off. And we'll do more of these sorts of things down the line in the future. Probably more stuff with trolley problems. They never go away and people are perennially interested in those. But for now, that is where we go. And you can leave in the comment what you would choose to do. And more interestingly, why would you choose the response that you do? That's, I think, more important than just do you pull the switch or not.